Wow. I'm a bit speechless, which is not a really good quality for a speaker. Can I get a show of hands who attended the keynotes yesterday? Nice, almost everybody. So I was really glad that I was there, and Dom talked about embracing the imposter syndrome, because honestly, I sometimes feel like an imposter. Talking at a conference as big as DevOps Belgium is really humbling. And I mean, but listening to Dom and also to Stefan, I feel a lot more comfortable now standing here, feeling like an imposter sometimes, because I sometimes make jokes and almost nobody laughs. I do have a wife sitting here in the audience that is mostly forgiving. And yeah, you can judge for yourselves at the end of the talk if I'm an imposter or not. What I do know what I am Doomsday Prepper. And I will take you on a journey on how to survive the apocalypse with Keycloak. So let me take you on a small journey, a time travel actually, back to the year 2020. I know a lot of talks start like this, bear with me. The world we know globally was engulfed with what we call the coronavirus. And for the first time in my life, I actually had to face my inner doomsday prepper. And I was thinking, I have a family, I have 2 kids. What do I need in case of like the worst situation that could possibly happen? You need water, you need food, you need medicine and healthcare to provide to your family. You need shelter, right? And I was actually looking into it. I was, okay, how can I need to buy probably some rice, some noodles, and you know, to be able to survive for a long period of time in case that global supply chains would collapse. To be honest, I was wrong. The only thing that I could not get was toilet paper. Right? I mean, that was the hardest thing you could get, and I totally prepared, or we prepared for the completely wrong thing. So who am I? I am Mike. I live in the Netherlands. I'm a senior software craftsman there. I'm a technical coach and speaker. You can find me on LinkedIn, Twitter, and Medium, so feel free to connect there. And I will take you on a journey through configuring Keycloak. And if you would like to take out your phones and participate very briefly in this inquiry, I would really like to know how much experience you guys have with Keycloak. So I'll give you about 30 seconds to complete this. And then I'll have a rough idea of the audience and what level of experience you guys have with Keycloak. Nice. I like the 2%. Can I get a show of hands? Who wants? I'll switch roles with you guys. Okay, nice. We got 68 people participating. That's 70. I mean, that's almost all the room. That's really nice. So a lot of you guys work on a daily basis with Keycloak. That's really good to hear. That's well, it's a tough crowd. Then I will do my best to meet your expectations. Okay. So let me talk to you a bit about Dooms prepping Keycloak. For those who do not have a lot of experience with Keycloak, Keycloak is an open source identity and access management tool developed by Red Hat. It supports all the protocols for authentication, OIDC, SAML, and so on and so forth. And the nice thing about Keycloak, apart from being open source, is that it's a very extensible platform. So you can do a lot of base configurations in it, but you are also in the state to implement custom providers and so on and so forth to really adapt to the needs of your project and your organization. Obviously, you can also integrate it with external IDPs. There are a lot of different Keycloak building blocks that you can use. The top one being a realm, which is like the context within Keycloak, and you can have various different contexts next to each other. One realm can never access the other. You have clients, you have roles that you can assign to users or clients. You can group roles into groups. You know, basically you can do anything with these building blocks, customize Keycloak and configure it in such a way that it meets your organization's needs. The configurations in Keycloak can be rather basic for very small projects, but they can get intensely complex for larger organizations. You need to maintain multiple tenants, for example. You have a lot of different applications which require clients, different authentication protocols, service-to-service calls, user-to-service calls. Sorry. So in the end, I mean, this looks very simple, but the overall environment of your Keycloak and the configuration environment can get quite complex. So how to approach these configurations? There are different ways how to do this, and in the past 4 years I've worked at various different assignments and I've basically used them all. So 4 years ago I started at an assignment where we actually used the admin UI combined with the admin CLI. So we had a lot of long bash scripts that were configuring our Keycloak instance. And you can also use JSON imports. So you basically configure your Keycloak, you export the configuration as the JSON file, and then you can load that into your Keycloak instance. You can even package it into it, right? So that's basically 3 different ways of configuring Keycloak, and there's a 4th one, which the whole talk is about. But first of all, I would like to know how you are configuring your Keycloak instance. So if you go back to the session of Slido and answer these questions, we will get a brief overview of how you guys configure your Keycloak instance. Okay, so I'm seeing a lot of admin UI, 55%. Okay, wow, I'm really glad that you're sitting in this talk because hopefully you will take a lot of inspiration back to your project after this. Okay, I really like to see that. I also see 13% already using the Keycloak Java Admin Client. That's really good to hear. I will briefly, for those who have never configured anything in Keycloak, I will briefly show you what it looks like to actually access the UI. So I'll briefly log in as an admin. Right, this is basically the UI you will be seeing when you log into the admin interface. You have out of the box the master realm. I already created an example realm. So let me briefly, throughout the whole talk, I will use the example of creating a realm. So let us create a realm. Let's call this DevoxxBE, right? And we create it. And we're done. Now we actually created a realm. It's, sorry, that's the most basic operation you can do. I'll have a brief sip of water. That's the most basic operation you can do in Keycloak, create a realm. Very simple example. So go back to the slides. There are advantages of using the admin UI. First and foremost, it's pretty simple. You don't need a lot of programming knowledge to actually click some configuration together in Keycloak. And anyone with credentials can do it. Okay, but is that actually an advantage? I listed it as the first disadvantage. Anyone with credentials can actually configure your instance, right? He just needs access to the master realm or to your host of Keycloak, and then they can actually do configuration. Release versioning, really, really difficult. At the project where I started first, we were actually documenting Confluence pages with the necessary steps on how to configure our instance. That was fine for the first 3, 4, 5 releases, right? But then we got to 20, 30, 40 release cycles, and it became really complex, and we were actually facing quite troublesome problems in the end. For example, the testability is very limited. And we were in a very big project, so the maintenance for these documentations or the steps which we needed to document, it was really complex. And also, and we started to think about that somewhere 30 release cycles into the project, is you get very complex recovery scenarios. We will talk about that in a bit. The admin CLI, it's basically a a CLI that allows you to configure your Keycloak instance in the background. It starts up a JVM, it executes the API call to your Keycloak instance, and it shuts down the JVM. Again, for very, one of the advantages is it's a configuration automation. Version control is actually possible because you can place your bash scripts into version control. And by that, you also have release versioning, which is possible. Downside, if you have really big projects, the CLI, the bash scripts, they're just not readable. If you want to create a realm, then you need to retrieve it to get the ID, and then it becomes unreadable very, very quickly. And what we have experienced when we stepped over to the admin CLI is that the execution time, if you have 3,000-4,000 configuration steps, gets really, really, really slow. You need to wait and wait. And I think we went up to like 40 minutes of deployment time in the end because the starting up of the JVM, executing one command, shutting it down, then again, that cost us so much time. So it's also for larger projects very suboptimal. JSON file imports, yes, we can have version control and we have configuration automation, but we've all seen the talks, and you can have centralized settings of your IDEs, but there's always that one developer that has different spacing settings than the rest of the developers. He likes 2 spaces instead of 4, and then he changes something in the JSON file, which is 15,000 files long, and the diff is just impossible to read in the end. Version control is a nightmare on JSON files. You're actually also dependent on Keycloak and how it exports the JSON file. To JSONs, there's no real order, right, of the key value pairs. So version control, basically impossible. You face problems when migrating to newer versions because the JSONs might change. And if you have 20,000 lines of JSON, it all comes down to it's not a really good idea to maintain JSON configuration for really big projects. And even if you do use these, right, we've seen that around 55% here do use the admin UI, and you happily put your configuration together. You have very good processes in place, like defining all the configuration steps in Jira, and you have a really nice bash script, and your deployment CI/CD procedures are very streamlined, and it's fast enough. We're happy developers. We configured our Keycloak instance. So what could possibly go wrong, right? Everything. Well, there are a lot of things that can actually go wrong, and that is the third interactive part that I wanted to share with you. In your projects so far, have you had any apocalyptic scenarios or unexpected scenarios that you were facing, like, for example, a corrupted database? So take your time, enter some things. They will pop up here. Please do not enter any bad language here because there's no artificial intelligence filter on it. So okay, empty database. Yeah, we've had that. Our database was gone. What to do? We go through 20 to 30 different Confluence pages and rerun all the configuration steps, and you have a very stressed operations manager that does not even know how Keycloak actually works. Okay, nice. Deleted realms. Okay, yeah, so I'm seeing a lot of troubles here. A lot is actually related to configuration loss and database loss. That is actually something that we have also experienced, or simply at an assignment, we were not sure if the database was actually corrupted or not. So we had to say, okay, we know that an incident happened at a certain point in time, and we need to go back. How do we do that? So we started an analysis of apocalyptic scenarios that could happen to us, and it came down to these. What could actually happen is that during one sprint, we defined new configurations that needed to be added to Keycloak, and it was all meticulously documented in these Confluence pages. And then human error, right? Somebody could do something wrong. They added the wrong configuration, the wrong secret. One wink in the admin UI was missed, right? Deployments usually happen very early in the morning. So things could go wrong. Deployments could go wrong. We've also faced this, that we were still not in the public cloud running on our own clusters. And I mean, since we still use the admin CLI and configurations could take a very long time, you could actually face timeouts of the pipeline. And then you're 40 minutes into your deployment, and then boom, everything is gone, right? Deployment pipeline timed out, the configuration was almost done, but just not, right? So, I mean, yeah, deployments can go wrong. So we were actually facing that. Knowledge is a really big factor, because if you have these complex code scenarios, right, these bash scripts that are thousands and thousands of files long, they are really hard to read. And we like to change projects every once in a while, and there's very few developers who sit on a project for 15 years. How do you maintain this? How do you teach somebody, okay, this is how you need to read the script, and this is where you need to be when you want to change that? So that is something that we also thought about. Yeah, who knows this statement? But we really only changed this one line of code, but it broke all of production. Well, yeah, regression, right? We write tests for it, we write unit tests, we write integration tests, component tests, and so on and so forth. If you use these manual approaches, or also the CLI and also the JSON imports, they're really hard to unit test. So any regression needs to be detected by manual testing, which is a very meticulous thing if you need to test your whole environment, if every authentication of every system actually works. And then we got these dudes. I mean, sometimes they make our life as nice, honest developers a living hell, which are the hackers. Script kiddies whatsoever, we face them, and you get these in 3 seconds, you get 40, 50, 60,000 entries of logs where they had some scripted attack against your Keycloak instance, and then your manager says, okay, I need to know if they got in or not. Well, okay. And it cost us quite a bit amount of time to go through these and actually check, okay, how far did they get? So we also thought during our Doomsday analysis, how can we make this better? Yeah, so we had quite a long list. There was more, but this is totally out of scope for this talk. Let's focus on these ones. And how can we prevent this from happening, that you have a very, very frustrated developer or a development team that really says, like, I don't want to do this. I have so much work to do. I want to focus on feature development. I want to, advance my project instead of doing analysis post-mortem on some incidents. Okay, so these are our core questions. How can we reduce risk and enhance security? How can we reduce recovery time if something actually happened and we were compromised? How can we reduce this time so we don't have 40 minutes of deployment time, but we want to be, up and about in a second? How can we also reduce a state delta during recovery? So we will get to that in a minute, what the state delta actually means during configuration. We also wanted to enhance maintainability and testability. So enter the Keycloak Java Admin Client. It's maintained by Red Hat also. It follows the same release cycle as Keycloak. And basically what it does, it's Java code. You create a client within your Java code and it calls the admin API. You pass it the credentials and that's it. There's not big magic, not a lot of magic behind it. But what you do get, it actually, if we go back, it actually ticks all of these boxes in terms of security, reduced recovery time, reduced state delta, and we will walk through these. I mean, the first thing you have to do is in your project, pretty much, you create a separate module within your Keycloak, and you add 3 dependencies: the Keycloak Admin Client, Keycloak Core, and Keycloak Services. Those provide you with all the interfaces and classes that you might need to maintain your configuration in Keycloak. What you end up what you end up with in terms of configuration and the image that you will be building is you actually have let's see, oops, sorry, wrong button. This one here, all the configuration code that we will be writing is actually a jar file that you could potentially package into your Keycloak image of your Keycloak server, the Docker image. You could run it on a Kubernetes sidecar whatsoever, where you, once Keycloak is healthy, just trigger the jar file. There are a lot of different possibilities on how to do that. There is actually also the possibility in terms of configuration as code to package a theme jar into it. You have your customizations in terms of providers you can implement as services, and you can actually control all the libraries that you will be packaging into Keycloak if you follow this configuration as code approach. So what are the advantages of using the Java Admin Client compared to the other versions of configuration we've seen up to this point? We have configuration automation. Okay, we've had that with some others. We have version control and collaboration. And the version control on Java code, I mean, you know, mostly we're Java developers here at DevOps, I believe. We know that, I mean, that is easier than maintaining version control on JSON files. It's basically how we work on any other project. You get packaging and release versioning. I mean, in the end, what you get is you have a jar file of your configuration. You can package it together with the most recent version of your Keycloak instance. You push that into your Artifactory, and you actually have one bundle of your Keycloak version and your configuration as code version that you want to deploy at your next release. There's more advantages, actually. Code becomes a lot more readable. We all can read Java code. It's just a beautiful thing to read. We get testability. We have unit testing and integration testing for our Java code, and we can actually launch these beautiful test containers where we simply launch our Keycloak instance and then we execute our configuration against it and then run the test that everything actually works. No added complexity for bigger projects. So it is definitely a little bit more work, right? You need to write more code than just clicking things together in the admin UI. But you have to do the work once, right? And then things actually become reusable. Most of the parts that you're using in the Java code, you say, okay, I want to create a realm. You do that once. You write the helper classes for creating a realm. And then the next time you want to do it, right, well, I already got it. I can reuse it. So it becomes really like components become reusable. So there's a lot of pros. I really thought very, very hard on the downsides of using the Java Admin Client. I couldn't come up with any. So if you have a downside, please come talk to me afterwards. I really would like to discuss that. Okay, so configuration as code. There are actually two different scenarios that I came about in recent projects. I would first like to talk about the static scenario. The static scenario actually being that I have some sort of, like some set of configuration. Ideally, my bootstrap, we call it the bootstrap configuration because I deploy my Keycloak instance, I start it up, and once that instance is healthy, we actually trigger the configuration. We're bootstrapping Keycloak, and then we're done. For the rest, it's actually idempotent, so you can trigger it as many times as you want, and you will still end up with the same state of configurations. So what we also did is we really tried to make Keycloak stateless. So in order to reduce a delta within the configuration, you could imagine that as, for example, you're creating a user in Keycloak or multiple thousands of users, and you have a continuous stream of users coming into your Keycloak instance. That is really hard to keep track of, and your state of the internal of the database of Keycloak continuously changes. So how to keep track of that? Well, What we actually did is we externalized everything from Keycloak. We implemented custom providers to do not store any users in Keycloak. So Keycloak was never the source of truth of a user. It was only taught, okay, if somebody logs in and he authenticates, check if that user actually exists in an external database. Right, so the configuration which we ended up with in Keycloak was actually stateless, which meant that whenever we had to do some disaster recovery, we didn't have any problems because there could not be any deltas. In terms of a timeline, that somewhat looks like this. So here, we're actually doing a deployment, right? We just released the latest version of our Keycloak instance. Okay, we go on about our daily business, we start developing features, and then some sort of apocalyptic scenario takes place here. Let's say some script kiddie launched an attack at 5 o'clock in the morning on a Sunday, and he said, like, yeah, I'll make their lives a living hell, and I'll try to do some SQL injections on the login screen whatsoever. You know, we've experienced it, all of it. And then you get in on Monday mornings, and your log is like, it exploded. And your manager comes to you and says, like, well, I want to know how far did they get. And our response would be, well, we don't care. We don't even care if he got into our instance, because the only thing we will do is we will wipe the configuration database, redeploy our Keycloak instance, trigger the configuration, and within, I think, a minute, we were done. We'd rotated all the secrets, and we're done, right? So we actually reduced our deployment time, our recovery time from, I don't know, like half an hour to down to like, I think 1 minute it was. And with the latest releases of Keycloak, I mean, before they used Quarkus and they were still on the Wildfly server in Keycloak, startup times were really slow. But since they have the Quarkus-based one, I mean, Keycloak starts up like this, right? We're all really happy about it. And that reduced our time even further. So that would be one scenario of actually static configuration and how we did the recovery. And then there is this way more complex scenario, which I've encountered in a more recent engagement, where you have dynamic configuration as well. Dynamic actually meaning that we follow the same scenario as before, where we have an initial bootstrap of your Keycloak, but then you actually also want to enable some admins or even users with more permissions to alter configurations and maintain their own set of configurations on Keycloak. Okay, but then we're actually facing a big problem because we know our set of configurations, right? But we can never know what they will be doing. So how to keep track of that? And we were thinking a lot about it. And then I actually had a really nice discussion at DevoxxUK with an ex-colleague of mine. He now works at Exonic. He sits there in the audience, Mitchell. So it really helped me a lot because we were discussing event sourcing and event stores. And I actually came up with the idea of, okay, why don't we create some sort of replayable configuration so we can trace all the events that have happened from the time of deployment. So let me underline this a bit with this graphic. So we have this time of deployment, and then something which we cannot know happens here in the middle, right? How do we keep track of it? So yeah, Mitchell actually said, okay, why don't you use an event store for that? Well, really cool. So we looked into that technology, and what we actually ended up with is that we actually isolated our Keycloak API completely from the outside world. The admin API, that is, right, where you configure it. And we built a wrapper API around our Keycloak instance. So any configuration that is coming in goes, except for the bootstrap configuration, I must say. So any external configuration by these guys here, the admins and users, goes via this wrapper API. And this wrapper API maintains an event store where any set of configurations we're getting, it will also be stored as an event. So what happens if that script kiddie comes again? So it's like, oh yeah, I'll make their life a living hell once again. And I will launch another scripted attack against their Keycloak instance. Okay, so now we need to, again, wipe the database. We re-trigger our bootstrap. And then we need to replay our set of events. I must say this is like the most basic rudimentary setup of this. You also have a scenario where you can actually have database backups, right? So that will shift the timeline a bit, where you say, okay, I do not need to replay all the events, but I actually take my most recent database backup of Keycloak, and then from the timestamp onwards until now, I take all the events that have happened in terms of configuration, and I replay them out of the event store. And what we eventually end up with is the desired state that we want to have. That is the idea. So event store came to the rescue. And I would really like to show you a little bit what that would look like. We will have a look at the static configuration, and we will also have a look at the dynamic configuration afterwards. So let's pray to the demo gods that this will work. Okay, I will briefly show you what this will look like when we start this up. Also, the whole packaging. Is this big enough for you guys? So let's do a brief walkthrough because we still have 14 minutes to go. Let's go do a brief walkthrough of what configuration as code could actually look like. So this is a very basic setup of a Java configuration application, right? This is what, with a lot of log statements, obviously what it will look like. This is your entry point where you simply say, I have a realm configuration, and I want to configure it with, right? I want to create an example realm, and this will actually trigger the. Let me have a look. The client. So we have a Keycloak client builder here, which is actually the whole core of the magic that will happen, is that it will actually take the server URL, so this is your host. It will talk on the master realm or whatever admin realm that you have defined in your configuration. You pass it a username and a password. Important thing is that this user needs admin rights, right? It needs elevated rights to be so it is able to actually create, delete, update any configurations on your Keycloak instance. And it talks on the admin CLI on that client towards Keycloak. But this is all default settings. You can obviously change that freely. Basically, what we then create is, we say here that we talked, I mentioned previously that we have idempotent bootstrap configuration, right? So what we actually need to write our code in such a way that we always do a create if not exists. Or otherwise, we update the existing thing, or in some cases, we just don't do anything. In the case of a realm, for example, we simply say, okay, if the realm exists, well, I don't mind. Maybe you pass it a new set of settings, then you can actually trigger an update as well. So this is basically what it does. It gets all the realm resources from Keycloak in line 21. It says if the realms are empty or if one of them matches my realm ID, then other way around, right? if it's empty or nothing matches my realm ID, then I will actually create it. Otherwise, I will trigger the update. So let's see what that actually looks like, and we'll go to the command line. Briefly showing you. So let's kill everything and have a look at what we're doing here. So we're packaging our project. It's nice and quick. It executes the unit tests. We haven't had a look at them yet. And what we end up with eventually is down here, our Java configuration jar, so that actually packages all the configuration that we desire into this jar. And what we also end up with is our Keycloak jar. This is the Keycloak server that has been bundled with all the custom providers and so on and so forth. Eventually, going into the building of the Docker image, I mean, we will not go into much detail here, but what we actually do here is we copy the configuration jar into a subdirectory of Keycloak. So we actually bundle it together with the Keycloak server. There are various different approaches on how you could achieve this. As I said, you could also decide that you want to keep it as a separate artifact and trigger it separately, or you bundle it together. That is really up to you in the end. The core thing is that we actually end up with two things. We end up with a Keycloak server jar, and we end up with a configuration jar. So let's actually start this. Oop. No, it doesn't work if you write Docker with two E's. Okay, let's give it a second. So it actually, in the background, it will start up a Postgres database. It will then trigger Keycloak. It starts the Keycloak server. There's a health check implemented on the Keycloak server, and once Keycloak is actually healthy, and we will briefly go into the service tab here. Right, we see here, hey, our Keycloak instance is healthy, and it will make this a little bigger. It added the admin user on the realm master, and it's running now. And then we can actually have a look into our Docker container where it says here, I mean, the logs are not that pretty, but it actually down here says finished Java configuration without errors. And it actually also says here, finished configuration of realm example. Meaning that it actually, in our Java code, if we go up here, triggered this, where we say we want to create our example realm, and it triggers the realm configuration. And we end up with, sorry, need to go here, nope, here, our admin instance, and let me refresh this. I will make this a little bigger so you guys can see this. So let's log in again. And check, hey, we actually got our example realm, which we just created via configuration as code. Okay, so this is basically the static setup, right? Where we said, we have an idempotent bootstrap configuration, and within between our releases, nothing should change with the configuration. We are in total control of the configuration, but that can change, right? So let's enable this. Let's enable our API wrapper to also do dynamic configuration. So what we will do is we're actually creating a client on Keycloak. We call this the example client. Just copy pasting this in here and say next. And then, I mean, for the sake of the example, I will enable direct access grant because it allows us to log in with username and password. It's not really ideal in a production scenario, but we're not. I will not add any configurations here. So we actually have a client that allows us to log in. The only thing we do need is a user. So let's create it as well. I called it test. And then it's here somewhere. Right, I'll just copy paste it. So create. So that created our user. We'll set a password very briefly. It's an insanely insecure password of test. We will make it not temporary, so we don't have to change it. We say yes. So basically what I did now is I created a client and a user within the example realm that allows us to actually obtain a token. So we briefly go to Postman to obtain a token. I already prepared this here. It's basically a call to the example realm, to the token endpoint. We give a grant type password. to the example client with our credentials. We say send, hey, and my prayer to the demigods worked. So we actually obtained a token, which we will briefly copy. And what I now build as well is, and let me go to the right IntelliJ, it's this one here. I built a wrapper API that actually is secured by our Keycloak instance. So the bootstrap should actually add all the configurations so that the API wrapper can talk to the Keycloak instance and obtain a token for itself, or that the user can obtain a token. And then it exposes certain commands. For example, the realms commands, and we want to create something. And apart from calling the Keycloak Admin Client, it should also call the event store to actually store this. So let's try this and do another prayer to the demigods. We paste our token in here and say we want to, in our body, create a DevOps test realm and say send. And we get back a 200. Nice. Let's have a look in our Keycloak instance. We're refreshing the page. And we actually got the DevOps test. Now, basically, there was not a lot of magic in it. I already showed you guys that the Java Admin Client can be called via an application. Actually follows the same pattern, the same dependency of the Keycloak Admin Client. But what also happened now is that we stored an event that this actually happened. And let me briefly refresh this database table. And here in our domain event entry, we actually stored an event with some payload of the event, which I will not get into. But we can see here as the aggregate identifier, which I defined in my API wrapper, that actually the DevOps test was created and is of type realm. So this actually enables us to in case of a disaster recovery, as I said, probably play in a database backup or trigger the whole bootstrap configuration and then replay all of our events. Okay. And that is basically what I wanted to talk to you about, and what I wanted to inspire you a little bit about, to maybe not use the admin UI, but consider using configuration as code. And I prepared a little Q&A. So if you have questions, because it's really hard to hear from the back these questions, and people in the front can't hear it. So if you have questions, you can type them in, and we have 3 minutes. So I'm happy to answer any questions if you have any, or you can come up and talk to me after the session. Thank you so much. Okay, we have a first question. How do you know Keycloak is fully started? So yeah, there's actually a health check. I can briefly... so whoever asked this question, it's actually really handy. Like, come up to me, I will show you in the code. It's a very simple call and it's actually a curl to one of the endpoints, and if you get a 200 response back, you actually know it's healthy. So if you want to know what it looks like, just come up. Or ask ChatGPT, it also knows. Okay, how to secure client secrets at database level. So for us, I mean, all the secrets, all the client secrets are actually handled via environment variables that are passed to it. So we launch our Keycloak in a Kubernetes cluster. There are secrets, and they're just passed to it as environment variables. So whenever there's a bit of a problem that, without a lot of customization, the hot reloading of secrets and also of certificates in Keycloak is a bit troublesome. So usually what you do is you have to, you rotate the secret and then you have to restart it. But basically it's passed to the configuration code as an environment variable. I think that also answers the secret handling. Okay, let's go. Can existing configurations be exported as Java code? Good question. I don't know of any such feature. I know that you can export it as JSON files, but yeah, as I said, there would be some initial work for you to actually migrate this to Java code. Okay. The Keycloak operator. Yeah, I mean, you can use the Keycloak operator, but it's a different way of configuring Keycloak. This is more about the configuration as code. So if you want to get into the Keycloak operator, sure, come talk to me afterwards. And we have 0 minutes, so thank you. If I didn't answer your question, please come up and talk to me. Thank you so much, everybody.